little bit about process, your nerd notebook, and 14-hour days when you wrote Remains of the Day. What is your process generally? Do you have a place where you go to write? Do you write long form? Do you like to write on a computer? If you can give us just a little bit of a sense of you sitting down to write a book.
Well, I should just, first off, I should explain about this 14-hour day thing that Sasha mentioned there. This is not something I do regularly. I just did this once in my life when I was a relatively young
You
man.
ruined it for generations already. I can never explain to my wife that 4 hours a day is a lot.
Now, this was an extreme measure, and I tried this. My wife and I called, for some reason I can't explain, we called it a crash. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was kind of predicting what would happen to me rather than anything else, but we called it a crash, and the idea was to, I think it was partly because I felt there were so many other things going on in my life. I just needed to forcibly create a space. So for 4 weeks, the decision was that I would not have any contact with the outside world. I would not see anybody else. I would not answer the phone, not answer any letters, because this was before the internet, and there was a strict number of hours that I would have to work every day. I seem to remember I had an hour off for lunch, 2 hours off for dinner, but I would have to work right up until the time I went to bed. And I used to have the Sunday was off. I do 6 days like this, and on the Sunday I would have it off, and I would be rather odd on that Sunday. I would go outside and start to giggle or something like that. But the result was, I only did this about 3 times in my life. And the first time it was very successful because that kind of intensity, I suppose the idea was that the fictional reality of the novel would actually start to take over from the reality of the world, the real world, And it did start to happen. I mean, it's a bit alarming, but and I did make all the important breakthroughs for that particular novel, The Remains of the Day. I mean, at the end of it, I had a pile of what to you might have looked like utter rubbish. It was really rough, but I had everything I needed to write that book at the end of those 4 weeks. And so after that, the process really was, tidying up, polishing it, trying to figure out the execution better. But for me, the important thing was done in those 4 weeks. But it's not something I would recommend or something I would necessarily want to do again. The next 2 times I attempted crashes, I mean, I just got tired and that was it. So the more steady way I go about things, I suppose the one thing that I do that might be different to say the way Sasha might go about things. I mean, you can correct me on this, but a lot of people don't do what I do. I don't tend to do like a draft of a story from beginning to end. Even the first draft, I don't do it like that. I spend a lot of time planning. And then when I feel ready to write the story, I only write about 30, maybe at most 40 pages. And then I redraft that over and over again, particularly the first 40 pages. I do it really carefully. No, I'm not just correcting the prose or making it more polished. I'm really thinking about the implications of every decision I make at that point. Because in the past, I've had this kind of problem that I've gone quite a long way into a book and thought, well, actually, if only that character had children. But it's too late now. Or if only, and so I've got kind of quite neurotic about, so I can only I have to go over and over thinking about the kind of implications of everything, all the artistic decisions I'm making, before I can do the next 30 or 40 pages. So sometimes I would draft a lot, and then I would do the next 30 or 40 pages. And sometimes I may only do 2 drafts, or it might go quite smoothly for one section, but there might be another section that I have to do over and over and over again. But I tend to do it in little chunks like that until I finally get to the end of the story, and then I look at the whole thing, and then I might start to make the overarching changes. But my drafting process is a bit odd like that. I'm not sure if other writers do this, but it kind of makes sense to me, because I think it's a bit reckless to just kind of go charging into things, kind of making decisions carelessly that are going to have huge implications all the way through. So that's how I go about it. In terms of how many hours I work on it, I mean that's like everybody else. The early drafts, when I'm just trying to think of produce the actual story itself out of nothing, I don't like to do too much. In fact, your 4 hours a day seems to be quite generous. I mean, quite hard working. I find that if at that first draft stage, when I'm trying to do things for the first time, the quality is much more important than the quantity, because you're going to be left with raw material with kind of substandard quality if you just try and push yourself. So what's really important for me is that the ideas are very good at that early stage. I don't worry about the style or the prose at that point. It's just about getting the ideas going. I mean, if you saw my early drafts, you'd be absolutely horrified. It's full of grammatical errors and sentences that go nowhere. And, they're terrible, but they're just for me to get the story going. And I leave the stylistic questions till later.
Over there, so close the microphone. You're next, I promise. And then over there somewhere.
I have a technical question. Your previous novels have all been in the first person, told by the main character, but the new novel is largely third person, with the author interjecting the pronoun I here and there. What made you decide to tell this novel not primarily in the first person?
Well, it's because in the past I was really interested in more or less the same question we've been talking about, remembering and forgetting, but it applied to just one person. Typically, a book like The Remains of the Day is made up of one person's memories and his struggles with his memories. He's doing funny things to his memories. He's hiding from some of them. He's kind of distorting others. He's just blanking out on some others. But it's that question that we were discussing applied just to one consciousness, and it felt like a no-brainer to use the first person. Because I had been wanting to make this step for a long time, from writing just about individual struggles with his or her memories, to societal, or a nation, remembering and forgetting, I thought I couldn't use first person again, because then just that individual thing would just dominate. Whichever narrator I chose, it would become another personal story about that person. It would be very difficult to get that sense of a nation struggling with remembering and forgetting. And so I thought it would be better to have something that was more flexible, where I could switch viewpoints, and indeed where I could have bursts of first person coming from different characters. I'm not necessarily saying it would have been impossible to do it as a first-person narrative, but that was my instinct. It was more that I thought if I did another first-person book, I would just get sucked into doing what I've done before, and I wouldn't manage to make this step towards talking about getting a sense of communal memory, societal memory. So I think that was the reason for that change.